All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started because I really want to be conscious of everybody's time, and we have until 1:30 today. My name is Lori Eldred. I am the Region 4 rep for NASW, and Region 4 covers 8 counties. So I cover Kent, Montcalm, Ionia, Oceana, Mecosta, Newaygo, Muskegon, and Ottawa counties. So it's a pretty large county, pretty diverse county. And there's a lot of us, I know, social workers in this region. I want to introduce you to Ken Nixon, a person I've come to know both professionally and personally, as a friend, as somebody I highly respect and admire, also look up to. And he is going to talk to us today about wrongful convictions and how social workers can help and really impact the experiences and the criminal justice system. So, Ken is an exoneree from Michigan. He spent 15 years and 9 months in prison for a crime he did not commit. He was convicted of 2 counts of felony murder, 4 counts of attempted murder, and 1 count of arson. He was sentenced to 2 natural life terms plus 40 to 60 years in prison. He was exonerated on February 18th, 2021. And since coming home, he has become a fierce advocate for criminal justice reform, taken on issues such as reentry services, vital documents, bank accounts, and housing. He is currently the chairman of the Organization of Exonerees. This organization has helped this was co-founded and started from the ground up. OOE is a group of dedicated men and women, primarily from Michigan, that are using their collective voices and their platform to directly address systemic injustices. They support the creation of conviction integrity units and stand against innocent people being incarcerated for crimes they did not commit. Their mission is to see every innocent person exonerated and free, while at the same time holding people in power accountable. Kenneth is also the director of outreach and community engagement at Safe and Just Michigan. Safe and Just strongly believes that Michigan can have safer communities with less incarceration. Their work is dedicated to addressing legislative and policy reforms that are restrictive and outdated. Punishment in prison should not be the answer to all of society's problems. And then, if that is not enough, Ken has been traveling the country fighting to advance criminal justice reform. He's been to Washington, D.C., working to bring issues to federal sentencing disparities associated with drug crimes and the Equal Act. He's worked with legislators in Missouri to revamp compensation laws for people who have been wrongfully convicted. He's part of a small hand-selected group of exonerees that have been chosen to facilitate wrongful conviction training with police cadets in Illinois, helping to make them aware of how someone's life can be ruined by the poor decisions with law enforcement. He has helped with policy changes in California and Indiana. He was part of an integral cohort that helped forge a partnership between Sony Music Group and Dream Corp Justice. In multiple states, he's worked directly with defense attorneys, prosecutors, attorney generals, individual innocent projects, and media outlets to investigate and help free innocent people from prison. In Michigan, he's been involved in vital documents, legislative reform efforts to ensure that every prisoner leaving prison with the necessary tools to be successful in society. He's helped with the clean slate and expungement initiatives to ensure that our citizens have a fair chance at having a meaningful life without being judged by their past. He is working to reform the Wrongful Conviction Compensation Act so that more exonerees can be compensated for the years that were stolen from them by the government. He's also working to address second chance hiring within the medical community. He's organized rallies and protests surrounding innocent people fighting for their freedom, and he works diligently to save people from death row in Missouri and Ohio. I also just want to take a moment of silence for someone recently in Missouri who was murdered by the government, Marcus Williams. He was an individual who was on death row, who the local prosecuting attorney felt he was innocent. The state intervened and executed him anyways. DNA showed that he was not the person that committed the murders, and other evidence supported his innocence. So I just want to take a moment to honor his life and the death that in his life that was stolen by the Missouri state government. Okay, thank you. And I did have that name wrong, so it was Marcellus Williams. Thank you. At this point in time, I'm gonna give Ken the floor. He's gonna talk to us about his experience, the journey that he's been on, his work, as well as how then social workers can help with the wrongfully convicted. So you are on.
Good afternoon, everybody. As stated, my name is Kenneth Nixon. Lori gave you a really long resume of work that sometimes I don't even remember I've done half the time. But I was arrested, charged, and convicted in 2005 for an arson fire in the city of Detroit, where 2 children perished as a result of an intentional fire. My name came up in the investigation immediately, literally immediately, and I was arrested just a few hours later. Once arrested, the police followed what we now know to be a suspect first investigation. They had their suspect, and then they looked for evidence to prove that I did it, which is the opposite of everything that television teaches us. Television teaches us that the investigation should let the evidence lead you to the suspect. Unfortunately, in this country, that is not what happens. They typically arrest the suspect first, and then they find the evidence to support the arrest. I would spend the next 15 years and 9 months incarcerated in the Michigan Department of Corrections before I would eventually prove my innocence and walk out of prison. My innocence was helped to be proven by a group of journalism students from Medill Justice Project in Illinois, the Thomas Cooley Innocence Project here in Michigan, and the Wayne County Conviction Integrity Unit in Detroit. Throughout the course of my appellate investigation, we discovered documents that told us that the police knew from the very beginning they had arrested the wrong person. This did not stop them or slow them down. They were talking about it amongst themselves. They were sending emails and memorandum between each other, discussing how they had known from the very beginning they had arrested the wrong person. Again, throughout the course of investigation, we also discovered a document that was in the prosecutor's possession that he as well knew that he had arrested the wrong person and he was about to try the wrong person, and he didn't care. After my guilty verdict, I was sentenced to 2 life sentences plus 40 to 60 years as a 19-year-old kid. I was sentenced to die in a cage by all intents and purposes by our government, even though they knew they were sending an innocent person to prison. Since coming home, and to be clear, I've only been home about 3.5 years. I came home February 18th of 2021, and I immediately set out to start solving problems. Based on my own experience, I understood the flaws of the system that directly impacted me. What I didn't realize was that I was not a one-off. I was not unique to the system in any kind of way. There were tons of people incarcerated or facing criminal charges that they were innocent of. And oftentimes, the common denominator for innocence in this country is poverty. There are no rich people in prison. I didn't meet any wealthy people that had rooms to themselves or couches or TVs in their rooms. There's no wealthy people in prison. They typically prey on the people that can't afford counsel or proper legal representation. And that kind of leads me into the social worker part of things. We're now coming to a place in society where we're starting to learn the importance of social workers in every aspect of criminal law. whether that's pre-trial investigation or post-trial investigation. Working in this space across the country in many different states, I started to see where the value was in social workers. And examples, pre-trial, learning who the person is, right? What is that person's background? What was their family environment? All of those are social worker questions. Lawyers don't know to ask the right questions of that person's upbringing or the parenting of the household, who raised that person, or did anybody raise that person? These are all serious questions that are considered by courts when presented. The difficulty is defense attorneys typically don't have the resources to make that argument. And most defense attorneys are severely overworked. And again, this is where social workers kind of come into play, because if they had that resource available to them, I'm sure that many of them would use it. On the post-investigation side, once you're already incarcerated, really digging into the roots and understanding where the case goes wrong, it's part investigation, but it's also part social work. Most investigators don't know the resources that they have available to them. They don't know where to look for things. They don't know where to ask for things. And it becomes extremely important about know-how. Knowing how to speak about that person's life or their upbringing in a way that lawyers can't do is something that a social worker can do. When we think about where we are in society and we really pay attention to how things are happening and playing out across the world, mental health is real. Mental health is serious. And the sad reality of pre and post incarceration is that a lot of people in today's time are suffering from mental health issues. Police officers are not equipped to deal with mental health issues. I was a part of a team of advocates that were very instrumental in having conversations with the Detroit Police Department about ways to use non-lethal force when it comes to a mental health crisis. We were able to convince the chief of police to purchase what is called bowler wraps. Bowler wraps is a tool that is being deployed by the Detroit police officers, where they fire this projectile at a person that's having a mental health issue, and it literally wraps around the person and restrains them. Once that person is restrained, now they have complete control and they have the scene now. No deadly force needed. And these bowler wraps are being deployed by special units that are created to respond to mental health issues. Post-incarceration, once a person has been exonerated, you've proved your innocence and you walk out. There is a very unfortunate belief that exonerees and people that are innocent walk out with a bag full of money and tons of resources. That is absolutely not true. We walk out with nothing. The clothes that you're wearing is what you have. Personally, as president and co-founder of the Organization of Exonerees, this is a sad reality that I deal with every single day. And very often, there's an extreme misconception about what's available and what's not, where to look and where to go. I'll give you a perfect example of what we don't know. We just recently had a transgender exoneree here in the state of Michigan, or there in the state of Michigan. And I had no idea how to help this person because I've never dealt with this situation before. Of course, naturally, I have people in my network that I can lean on. Social workers that had answers to some of these questions that I didn't know how to deal with. And it's not always a material question. Sometimes it's as basic as understanding the language. How do I communicate with this person without being offensive? How do I communicate with this person that is new to this space? That can be extremely difficult when there's a lack of knowledge. Not for intent, but just a lack of knowledge. So learning to navigate re-entry in a lot of different ways is, one, largely important, but two, It also sometimes requires a professional touch where social workers can fill that gap on the reentry side of things, being able to help people that are trying to navigate society. Where the prison system fails or the criminal justice system fails is where social workers can step in. And sometimes it's extremely small things. I'll give you an example from Washington County. We had a person that was paroled after 35 years. We received that person. He was going to a community housing. And when we arrived at the residence, his parole officer was there. She literally handed him a bus pass and keys to the house that he would be staying in. I asked her, how was he supposed to use the bus pass? She said, go to the bus stop. Where is the bus stop? Oh, it's down the street. What's he supposed to do with the bus pass? Give it to the driver. Well, did you explain that to him? No. Well, which direction is he supposed to go? I don't know. I say all that to say, after 35 years of being incarcerated, this person didn't know anything. He didn't know anything. He didn't know where to get underwear. He didn't know where to get socks. He didn't know which way was north or which way was south. These are all things that we had to help him navigate. How do you get a state ID? How do you get a birth certificate? How do you get a social security card? How do you get your passport? These are all very extremely important questions. Learning to navigate the housing space is hard. It's hard. Areas of corporate governance that there's so many barriers in place. For one, regular society doesn't know how to navigate. And when you take a person from regular society for sometimes decades, and then you throw them back into it and you tell them to figure it out, it's a setup for failure. We're working extremely hard to try to bring down those barriers. But in the interim, we need social workers to help speak to these problems, to help us navigate these issues in ways that they just shouldn't be issues. Being a part of legal teams is something that has value. It has value, hopefully, for anybody that's interested in it on a personal level, but it also has value to the legal team itself. I've said this to a room full of lawyers. I'll say it to you as well. Lawyers are good with what's in front of them. They have no idea what they don't know. Being able to bridge that gap of knowledge and communication could save somebody's life. Most of you may not know, death penalty cases require a social worker in some states. They require someone to do that digging that lawyers don't know how to do. Being a part of a legal team is extremely fulfilling, especially when it's for the right thing. There are a lot of nuances when it comes to the legal community as a whole. Learning where you fit in can be difficult. Getting connected to the right people can be difficult. But asking the right questions can never be difficult. Pushing back against the narrative that there's no space for social workers and criminal justice is not hard at all. We just have to show where the value is. For those of you that are interested in working in this space, we have 2 innocence projects. We have conviction integrity units across the state that all need help. They need help learning the things that they don't know. Having a simple conversation with some of the people involved in this work, you'll quickly realize where you can bring value to a lot of the work that is being done. From someone that has been directly impacted by the justice system, I had tons of resources when I came home. I had lawyers, I had family, I had lawmakers, I had business people in my corner, and it was still extremely difficult for me to understand the most basic things that you guys probably do on a regular basis that is like clockwork to you. Most of society doesn't know. No one knew how to tell me to get a birth certificate. No one knew how to tell me to get a social security card. No one knew what to do when I needed 3 pieces of ID to get 3 pieces of mail to get an ID from the Secretary of State's office. No one knew what to do. Most people know where their birth certificate is. Most people know where their social security card is. It literally took a social worker to walk me through navigating how to get vital documents. Since that day, I've been fighting to get legislation passed where it will require the Michigan Department of Corrections to provide everyone walking out of prison with a state ID and a birth certificate. These are 2 things that are extremely important, and they're important for more reasons than most people think. Technically, you're not even a citizen of the state of Michigan without a birth certificate and a social security card. You can't work, you can't get housing, you can't get anything without vital documents. But yet, the Department of Corrections was releasing people back into society without this information. When we began to have these conversations with lawmakers and governmental departments, it became very clear. The change that was made is that the Department of Corrections is now purchasing birth certificates for all of the incarcerated people, and they're handed to them upon their release. The problem is, it's just a policy. We're currently trying to get it etched into law to make it harder to roll back in the event that a new administration takes over, which is absolutely inevitable. The complaint from the Department of Corrections is it costs about $1 million a year to purchase birth certificates for the entire population. It's a cost that is beneficial to the rest of society. And the way that we were able to bridge that gap in telling that story is, how are you asking someone to be successful and stay out of trouble, and you're not providing them the tools necessary to be successful and stay out of trouble? Having social workers in place for some of these organizations takes the government out of it. It takes that responsibility out of governmental hands, which is, we all know, to be a failure. Even testifying before a congressional committee, the spokesperson for the Michigan Department of Corrections said they had a 98% success rate with getting birth certificates for people that are being released. I testified after him, and I praised him for his 98%. But I challenged him to figure out why there were still 2% falling through the cracks. Because the problem that I saw is, all it is one government agency asking another government agency for a document. So why is there still a 2% error rate? Some of the people that we've seen have difficulty with this process are people that, 1, don't know how to navigate the system, or 2, there's problems with the system. Things such as not knowing which county you were born in, or which city you were born in. We've had some people that don't know their parents' real names. The government doesn't know how to figure this out. When we talk about re-entry, post-release, clothing, mental health services, how to get a cell phone, how to find housing, homeless shelters, how to navigate the process to get on Medicaid or EBT cards. These are things that social workers do for a living, but most of society struggles to figure out on their own. When you mix in post-incarceration to some of these conversations, it's next to impossible for someone to figure this out. There's a lot of work to be done. There is a big gap between what you do and what the legal community needs. I implore each and every one of you to find a space. Find a space, because your expertise is needed. And believe it or not, there's room for you. Whatever it is that you like to do, whatever part of your job that is fun for you, someone in the legal community needs it. there is a lot to be learned, and there's a huge gap about value from personal experience, from advocacy side of things, and as a leader in this space. Social workers have huge value in the criminal justice system. I pause for a break. Any questions from anybody?
I have a question. What, Ken, do you think if you are a social worker interested in either a particular case or a particular aspect of criminal justice reform or even working with an attorney, what are maybe a couple things that a social worker could do? So let's say they do have some skills they would like to use with an attorney or a group of attorneys. What would be maybe a couple of things that a social worker could do? Is that like reaching out? Is it kind of off?
Absolutely.
Is it
I,
else?
I think the first thing would be reaching out, right? Making a connection and having that conversation. Because again, a lot of attorneys don't know or understand the value and what social workers bring to the table. So be breaching that conversation, the lawyer's not going to do it because they don't know that there's value there. So asking for a meeting or a quick conversation, a phone call, a lunch, a coffee, and being able to explain why you see importance or why you want to be involved in a specific case or a specific topic or that organization as a whole. These are all things that we need social workers sort of to take the initiative, because a lot of times they don't know. They just simply don't know. And, people like me, I'm having those conversations, right? I'm talking to the people that I know about, one, the value of social workers, but I'm also an outlier because I'm bridging the gap, right? I'm not just asking, or I'm not just bragging about my social worker friends or my attorney friends in these different rooms. I'm making a connection. I don't want to tell you what this person can do. I'll put you two together and you can tell each other what you can do. That soft introduction has opened up a lot of relationships for a lot of different people in big and small ways. Understanding where these two mediums intersect is a huge, huge learning curve for a lot of people. So to your question, how can people get involved? Ask the questions, reach out, ask the questions. I mean, be specific. Sometimes specific helps. Sometimes being vague helps as well. There's a very true statement, less is more. And simply shooting an email saying, hey, hi, my name is such and such. I'm a social worker and I would like to have a conversation with you. That intrigues lawyers most of the time because now they want to know what the hell you want to talk to them about. They're going to set up the meeting.
All right, Nicole.
Hi, Ken. So I find a lot of what you're saying extremely interesting. I actually currently work in the MDOC as a therapist, as a psych, and it honestly breaks my heart to hear your story. I had a gentleman that got released back in 2021, wrongful conviction, spent down 18 years for a crime he didn't do. One thing I want to ask you is, reading his PSI completely told me right then and there he did not do that. And so I feel that PSIs are very subjective when it comes to whoever is writing them. So what would be or have you thought about how we could make that a more streamlined report, so it's not, because there are a lot of assumptions and there's a lot of prejudice and there's a lot of, I believe this person did this, so this is what we're going to say in them, and how we could help that.
That is an absolutely true statement. Pre-sentence investigation reports are extremely biased. They are leaning to one side most often. The person that is writing them is a government employee, and oftentimes they are under the guise that they're doing the right thing. They are also arms of the prosecutor's office most often. So the narrative is being told by the one side that has a interest in the outcome of that case. So naturally, the PSI is written in a way that is to convince the judge why this person needs to be punished one way or the other. Again, circling back to social workers. What happens when these pre-sentence investigation reports are written? They oftentimes don't get challenged by attorneys because the attorney didn't do the investigation in order to tell his client's story. So the way we push back on that is actually telling the truth about what we know about this person. When we look at pre-sentence investigation reports, that investigation was done by a person with a slanted view of who they're describing and what the punishment should be. The only way to combat that is by meeting it with true information that is unbiased and facts. Oftentimes, lawyers don't have the resources to do their own post-conviction investigation. They don't. So they take whatever is said to them by the investigator that wrote this report, and they take it at face value. So to answer to your question is getting involved on the front end.
Because yeah, I find that it brings a lot of extra hate within the system because officers, of course, and other staff take that PSI at face value, and of course it's looking at them like they're this like horrible person, but every one of them has a quality or a trait, whether they're innocent or if they're guilty, and I think it causes a lot of extra negative behaviors, I guess is one way I can say that.
Absolutely. Not only is it negative behavior, but the one thing, and sorry for cutting you off,
No,
the
you're
one
okay.
thing that is extremely important to remember is what is left out of the PSI. What's left out? There's so many people that I met while incarcerated who had documented histories of familial mental health issues,
Mhm.
generational mental health issues that was never documented in their PSI report or any of their court proceedings whatsoever. So when that person enters the system, they're not being given the right medication. They're not being treated properly. They're not being given or provided the resources necessary to ensure that, one, they're keeping themselves safe, or that they're keeping the prison environment safe,
Mhm.
or that this person, when they do eventually walk out of prison, because 90+% of people that are incarcerated will be released at some point or another,
Mhm.
having this information be accurate means that when that person is released, they can seek the necessary treatment to make sure that they don't fall back into whatever behavior caused them to act out in the first place. Our system is set up in a way where it's punishment first. They punish you first, and then they figure out what's wrong later. If we knew what was wrong on the front end, we probably could have prevented what was going on to begin with. But because that information isn't provided or recorded or documented in the proper context, that person's never treated the way that they should be.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I struggle a lot with my own ethics and like things that I have to deal with every day working within the system, because I come to work every day for these inmates, and I can say probably 90% of my coworkers do not, and it gets very frustrating. I did want to respond to the question that was in, if it's better impact in the correctional system or outside. Outside, you can't do anything in here. There's too much red tape. There's too much policies, procedures, security that we get stuck behind, and we get told to stay in our lane, and we get told that you shouldn't care that much. You're here for this and you're here for that. And why do you give a crap? So I would say if anybody, as a social worker who works in the Department of Corrections, if you are interested in helping people that have been wrongly convicted, do it on the outside. You're going to get a lot farther along with it. You'll get a lot of backlash, a lot of hate working in here.
I 100% agree with that answer. People, the Department of Corrections is not designed to be helpful in any kind of way.
Oh.
Mental
I tell
health
people more-
services.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I know you're, go ahead, keep going.
Speaking specifically to your point, what on a bigger scale, that's I want to avoid individualizing it, right? But the
Mhm.
reality is healthcare in prison is privatized. It is a business. It is a business. They're cutting costs every which way they can. They don't want you to have the right medication. They don't want you to have the necessary services to make sure that you're even. It doesn't make them any difference. Their concern is their bottom line. Their concern is making sure they're making as much money as possible off the state of Michigan by providing the least amount of services they possibly can. This is the underlying narrative that many people in society don't fully understand. It is a private industry.
Mhm.
This is a business. They have no incentive to pay anybody more money to do the right thing. They don't have an incentive to pay more money to buy the proper medication to make sure this person is healthy.
Mhm.
That's not their incentive. Their incentive is profits. Prison industry is run by spreadsheets.
Hence why we are still very much in like the 1940s when it comes to even custody and security and the medications that we do give. Like our go-to are Haldol and Remeron, Boost Bar, and Thorazine. Like trying to get anything else is you can't. Like it's
And
depressing.
from someone that has witnessed this firsthand, what we used to say is you drug them enough to control them and leave them alone.
Mhm.
I also want to add in here, I too worked at MDOC. And you know, when you go back to the issue with the PSI, that also is used as the basis of any evaluation. So, you know, if you're an individual that needs sex offender treatment, looking to get paroled or anything else, right? If your PSI is incorrect or doesn't have the right information, doesn't have all of that information, then that's used that foundational basis of whether you can get treatment or whether the treatment, right? We know with sex offender treatment, like it can be beneficial, but not everybody necessarily would score at a risk to get treatment. So like putting folks into sex offender treatment who don't necessarily need it can be very skewed by a PSI, as well as if you're somebody up for parole and you get asked as a mental health clinician to do like a parole evaluation and your PSI is incorrect, that impacts also your ability to get paroled and any type of services, you know, outside of prison, which could mean, you know, do you need substance use treatment? Because substances are rampant in the prison system. You can get more of them probably inside the prison than you could get them out, or you can make them. And then, you know, mental health treatment, housing, all of that type of stuff. So yes, the PSI being able to make sure that's accurate. Most of them are done by probation officers. Most probation officers or parole officers are not social workers. There are social workers that become those, but the high majority are not social workers. So there's not really that systemic look at some of what is happening in a person's life, because that is a huge benefit from a social worker perspective, is we learn and understand how systems are intertwined, how the criminal justice system is connected to racial violence and racial injustice in our society, how that impacts housing, poverty is a factor, childhood abuse and neglect. So, you know, as a social worker, we're also uniquely, I think, trained and educated to understand that, which can beautifully work in a PSI. But if we're not in those positions, that information doesn't get, to the right people to get the right treatments and supports.
Well, I think that's funny that you said that, Laura, because I also work in MSAT. So I work with sex offenders, and I do have a couple that truly don't necessarily need to be in sex offender treatment within here, like maybe go and do some community therapy and things like that just to get over that hump. Where I have others that have actually waived out that I'm completely confused on how that's even a possibility. And so I do think there's some skewing there. Overall, I think our program that we have now is amazing. It is really helping a lot of guys and helping a lot of them not come back on sex charges. They may come back on something else, but they're not coming back on sex charges. But yeah, it gets frustrating.
But there's also a couple components that can be overlooked here in this specific conversation as well. If a person is not being treated properly while incarcerated, there's a very high likelihood that that person won't be treated properly once they're released from prison, because there's no documented history of you actually having a problem. The other part of that is, if the person does need medication, where do they go to get it? How does that treatment plan transfer over into to society when that treatment plan was never created to begin with? These are all things that there's a very big lack of education surrounding this in the legal community. The other component of this is Social Security. A lot of people that are suffering from some form of mental health illness are being released into society with no resources whatsoever. And some people don't, because of whatever they're suffering from, they don't have the ability to work. Some people are struggling from things that restrict them from working in group environments, or things that could be triggering for them and cause them to lash out in ways that, one, corrections officers don't know how to deal with, two, police officers don't know how to deal with, and three, the court system surely doesn't know how to deal with. But if this was documented, if people were able to understand what this person was dealing with, we'd know better how to help that person. Unfortunately, lawyers, the legal community, the court system, the Department of Corrections are not equipped to do this. Not only are they not equipped, they're not trained to do this. You guys know terminology that most of society has no idea what the hell you're talking about sometimes, but you know what to look for. You know what signs equal what. You know when things aren't right. And we're trusting lawyers and police officers to tell us what's right. We are watching it play out every single day where they don't know what they're doing.
Did you kind of have more you wanted to add about kind of that idea of working inside the system or outside the system, in terms of if you're able to enact more change internally, or, more change externally?
I mean, specifically on that topic, I think the greater benefit is the impact would be greater felt on the outside. However, as nasty as this tastes to say, we do need good people on the inside. We need people to push back against that narrative. We need people to stand up for the rights of the people that can't speak for themselves. There, unfortunately, are people that are incarcerated that don't know what they're suffering from. They don't know what kind of medication they need. They don't know what kind of help they need. Some people are self-harming. Some people are violent towards others. Some people are extremely difficult to deal with as a human being. But there's nobody questioning why. There's nobody. The major question for me to the system as a whole is why. When lawyers ask me, what can I do better? How can I advocate for my client better? Start asking why. That is a huge question, and nobody in the criminal justice system at all ever asks, not prosecutors, not judges, not defense attorneys. If we knew that the lady that got caught walking out of Walmart with a cart full of groceries, if we knew why, it probably would be a different outcome. I think we'd look at her different if we asked her why and she told you that she had 4 kids at home to feed and had no money. We'd judge her a lot differently, as opposed to assuming that this lady was committing a crime for profit. Or if we asked that kid that was caught in a stolen car why he did it, and he turns around and he tells you because he was cold and tired of sleeping on the street, you probably look at him different, because we didn't know that kid didn't have a place to go. We didn't know that mom didn't have money to feed her kids. It's all based on assumption. For those of you that work in the criminal justice system in any way currently, I implore you to question everything from the government. Everything. Some of it's true. Most of it is based off opinion. Almost all of it is based off opinion. None of it is rooted in facts. The sad thing is the narrative that is created is, again, being created by people that have an interest in the outcome of whatever that person is dealing with at that particular time. Almost none of them have an interest in actually seeing that person get help or get healed or get the resources that they need. They're concerned about punishment. That's where we're trying to change the narrative. If we can shift from punishment to correction, society would look a lot different.
And I know too, as social workers, some of us are also in the therapy space. So some of us are in private practice or working in some type of outpatient therapy space. That's another way, right? We can, per our code of ethics, take pro bono work. Maybe we take on a pro bono client that has been wrongfully convicted or is involved in the criminal justice system. We can get more training to understand how to work with those individuals who are not much different than most of the other clients who are facing real systemic problems, concerns, needs for resources, and just support and advocacy. We can also volunteer as just like your average citizen. I've done some volunteer work with Safe and Just. Just on my own time, that's also a way. I mean, even getting involved with criminal justice organizations to lend your professional expertise, even if it's just more on a personal level, serving on committees or volunteering on committees or just, canvassing or any of that type of stuff is other, kind of other ways social workers can help outside, I think, of the criminal justice system. As well as, taking on pro bono clients or work, advocating, if you're a student, are there classes that can happen at a master's or bachelor's level that address criminal justice reform, working with folks in correctional settings. That's even another way if you're a student or in a BSW or MSW program. I don't have any other questions so far in the chat, but does other things that they would want to know in terms of wrongful convictions? Like, are there good, resources for people to either read or listen to? I did drop in the chat the podcast episode that you were in with the podcast Wrongful Convictions by Jason Flom. That will give more information into your story, but are there other ways people can kind of get information, read more?
Yes, actually there is. The National Registry of Exonerations is a website that keeps a record of every case in the country of wrongful convictions. The registry can be narrowed down to state, so you can see everyone in Michigan. The registry, it's funny that this became a part of the conversation because just this morning, one of our guys was just added to the registry today, I think. But the importance of the registry is it's a documented record of where the system failed that person. Oftentimes, we don't realize that some things are done intentionally by government officials, or sometimes things are done by mistake. Sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And wrongful convictions happen for many different reasons, right? I don't want to sit here and beat up the police or prosecutors because that's not why I'm here, right? I firmly believe that we need police and we need prosecutors. We just need the good ones, not the bad ones. So I'm not crazy enough to say that all police are bad or all prosecutors are bad. However, there are some that have intentionally ruined the lives of innocent people. And these are just the cases that we know about. We typically hear about rapes and murders and armed robbers, but what about the person that pled guilty to a crime that they didn't commit because they didn't want to lose their house, or they didn't want to lose their car, or their kids be kicked out of certain school districts because of, missing too many days of school? There's a lot of people in this country that take plea agreements just to get out of jail. The court system sometimes can be so slow that a person can be sitting incarcerated, waiting trial a year, 2 years, 3 years. You've lost everything that you've worked for in that time. So people under pressure, under duress, they accept plea agreements, not fully understanding the collateral damage that comes with having a felony record or a misdemeanor record out in society. Having good social workers in a space where you can help that legal team tell a narrative around that person can be of great influence when it comes to how that person is treated within the system or outside of the system. These are all things where, again, social workers bring value. Being a part of a legal team and educating not only the legal team, but the legal community on the benefits of having a social worker are incredible. Simply put, they're incredible.
Can you talk, Ken, a question in the chat, just Chris asked, are there programs focusing on expungement? So I know you've done and working on through Safe and Just expungement of criminal records. So if you can kind of talk about that a little bit, what you're doing, maybe if you're able to, kind of what's coming down the pipe, and then how can social workers help in that area of criminal justice reform?
So yes is the answer. There are programs. In fact, the state of Michigan, just a few short years ago, revamped the expungement laws themselves. They've changed. They were very restrictive historically. Up until a couple of years ago, Safe and Just Michigan, who I am the director of outreach and community partnerships for, was very hands-on in getting that law changed to make it more inclusive. Furthermore, April of last year, what was implemented is something called automatic expungement. Automatic expungement is a system that was designed and built by the state of Michigan that literally scours the criminal justice system, computer system, every day, several times a day, looking for convictions that fit the criteria that can be expunged. The system does it by itself. There have been over 1 million criminal records that have been expunged in the state of Michigan since the implementation of this new law. However, there are still flaws with this law. One of the major flaws is there's no notification requirement. Some very smart lawyer forgot to put the part in that says you're supposed to tell people that their record was expunged. So now we have a law where people's records are being expunged and they don't know. So sometimes the difficulty in that is people could be going into job interviews or housing interviews, and they're talking to that employer about a crime that doesn't actually show up on their record anymore. To the question of, are there programs? Yes. So clean slate, there are expungement fairs happening all across the state of Michigan. I'm sure you can find them looking up the websites in your area of local legal organizations. Safe and Just Michigan, also, we do them across the state. A quick search of our website will tell you which ones and where we have coming up in the next month or so. The Detroit Justice Center is one, the local legal aid clinics, the NAACP offices. All of these places have resources to help people get this done for free. There is a very big misconception that it requires a paid attorney to do it. That is not true in today's time. Some places may be slower at doing it because of the influx of cases because of the new law. But the reality is there's a lot of free resources for people to help get their records expunged. Looking up local expungement fairs is a good place to start.
And when you have a criminal, I just want to add this in too, when you have a criminal record, you know, it can impact social workers in a couple ways. So it impacts our clients, absolutely. Housing, access to federal benefits, employment, I think pretty much every aspect of our life, being able to take a car loan, that type of stuff can really impact, our clients. But also, if you are a social worker and you have a felony or a criminal history, that can prevent you from getting employment at any agency or organization that takes Medicaid or Medicare. So if you want to work, you're a social worker, and maybe you're coming into social work because you have a lived experience of being somebody that's been involved in the criminal justice system, or maybe you had substance use issues, or right, maybe you were an 18, 19, 20-year-old kid who got caught. And many of us at 18, 20, 21 have done a lot of things we didn't get caught for, but you unfortunately got caught and have a criminal record. That also can impact your ability as a social worker to get employment, right? You can get licensed as a social worker in the state of Michigan with a criminal history. You have to really, make a good case for good moral character when you fill out your licensing application. And so you could get licensed, but you might not be able to practice depending on where it is that you want to practice. So, this issue isn't just impacting our clients, but it also can impact us. And right now, social workers, I've talked about this, I think, in a lot of different spaces, there's a big workforce shortage. Lots of places are struggling to get fully licensed or even limited license, social workers in, and this can just be another barrier for you. So sometimes with social work, the personal and the professional can be overlapping. And, when we can help our clients get criminal record expungements, it will open up so many more doors for them, housing and all types of resources. So I just kind of want to add that plug in terms of expungement. Michigan is really kind of leading the way in that with the clean slate and having automatic expungements, or at least allowing folks who, qualify for an expungement to go through the process. I mean, it is a lengthy process. Someone very close and dear to me has gone through this process of expungement. And it wasn't easy, but it happened. And it was quite a process. And I know having somebody to help navigate that person through how to fill out the paperwork, what courts to file, what paperwork to get, right, can be just so life-changing. Anything else you want to, looking in the chat here, anything else you want to add about expungement, Ken?
No, I don't think so. I think you made a good point though, that a lot of people don't realize. There are some Medicaid and Medicare restrictions for funding. The reason that you can't be hired by a lot of organizations that are heavily funded by Medicaid or Medicare is because there are federal restrictions about who can receive those funds and what employees they can have on staff. This is one of the areas that Safe and Just Michigan is currently working to repair in Michigan. The federal government has said that if you have certain felonies, you cannot be funded through their programs, which means the organization itself that is doing the employment would have their funding pulled if it was found out that someone with a felony, a certain felony, was being compensated with the funds being provided from the federal government. So it creates a very restrictive barrier to a lot of people, which is extremely unfortunate because my personal opinion is that the punishment doesn't fit the crime in a lot of these situations. To make matters worse, the federal government outlined certain convictions. The state of Michigan took it a step further and added additional charges to the list that the federal government has already made. And to add insult to injury, some of the private companies added more charges to this list. It's absolutely insane. The reason I say it's insane, and I said this to quite a few CEOs of healthcare providers, what does a person's 20-year-old gun case have to do with your ability to perform CPR? If my mom is having a heart attack and the EMS show up, I'm not stopping them at the door to ask if they've ever been to prison before. I don't care. But unfortunately, again, some very smart people that are highly educated decided this was a thing. And now we have a situation where the healthcare industry is bleeding employees and they can't keep the help they need because of these restrictive barriers. The other thing that I've learned and discovered in doing the research in this space is that most leadership teams and some of these organizations don't even know they have these policies. These policies are archaic from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And they don't even realize that they're restricting employees, sometimes very good employees, from being able to work under their ranks because of some archaic law that says you can't have a certain conviction. And to be clear about it, there are some companies that operate in the state of Michigan that says a misdemeanor, any misdemeanor, would restrict you from working certain jobs for a minimum of 5 years. So to put that in a context, jaywalking is a misdemeanor. You could step off the curb too soon and ruin your career at certain companies. It's absurd. The reality is it's true, and they're enforcing it regularly.
Something you and I have talked about, Ken, is a lot of third parties too have used, do background checks for companies and have erroneous information, right? A lot of companies, will use, and I don't remember the particular companies, but, in the state of Michigan, you can do iChat, you can pay $10, run iChat and get, a background done on yourself. But some companies or organizations, businesses contract out to third party background, verification agencies. And it's also a place of advocacy where they can have incorrect information. And I don't remember I know you and I talked about.
Yeah, so that's absolutely
that was
true.
doing that, and it was a huge barrier.
That is absolutely true. A lot of companies and organizations are using third-party background checks. I mean, even the most basic ones that people don't even think about sometimes. Airbnb uses background checks. DoorDash uses background checks. Lyft, to be a Lyft driver, background checks. And they use third-party background check companies. The issue with these third-party organizations is they get paid based on the information that they find. They have no incentive to provide accurate information, none. So whatever they find, they turn over to whichever company is paying them. The reason this becomes a problem is if that information isn't accurate or it's entered into the system wrong, now you've got a problem that is an uphill battle to fix. Having proper documentation to show that your record was expunged is the only thing that can save you. The only thing that can save you. The issue for a lot of people that are re-entering society from incarceration is not all of the information that's being put out to the community is accurate. Me, as an exoneree, people assume that the moment I walked out of prison, my record was clear. That is absolutely not true. It took me 2 years to get my record clean. The difficulty in that is every time I applied for a job, I had to explain why this was on my record. Every time I tried to get housing, I had to explain why there was an open murder conviction on my record. The most insulting thing that I've had to deal with was I was denied an Airbnb account based on this background. I have to jump through hurdles every single time that I tried to do anything that required a background check. Sometimes I had to get lawyers involved. Sometimes I had to have the prosecutor email a letter over to these organizations. It was extremely difficult. The lesson to be learned there is not everything you read is true. And again, circling back to my previous point of don't trust the government. The information that was being provided to these background check companies was provided to them by the government. And we had to jump through hurdles to get it repaired. Even though I was out, I still had to explain why my background said there was a murder conviction. I'm out and walking free. This record said that I was serving a life sentence in the Michigan Department of Corrections. These are huge, huge issues that lawyers are not equipped to deal with. They're not. Helping create that narrative of where, why, and how the system can be repaired is a social worker job. And I say that with all intents and purposes. What you've been trained to do, what you've been trained to recognize, the things that you've been trained to help with are a niche field. You are specialists in your work. This is a very special interest group that can do things that not very many people can do. I don't know many lawyers that can speak to mental health issues. I don't know very many lawyers that know what fetal alcoholism is. I don't know many lawyers that can provide the necessary information to a judge or a prosecutor to help decide if that person needs care or if that person needs punishment. What we are learning now in today's society, and we're shifting the conversation to, is ensuring that the person gets help. I think a lot of lawyers are starting to understand that punishment isn't always the answer. Some people, a lot of people, and for those of you that work inside and those of you that are questioning whether or not to work inside, prison is the new mental health system. Instead of treatment, we incarcerate people. Instead of providing help, we lock them in a cage. Prison systems are filled with society's misfits. They are loaded with what society deems as not normal. This isn't helpful. The difficulty in this environment Prison is a highly concentrated environment of what we consider to be the worst of the worst. What you see on TV, they don't go away. They just put them all in one place. That news clip that you saw, and you quickly realized in that 30 seconds that this person was suffering from something, they didn't get him help. They locked him in a cage. We need help in this industry. We need social worker help to tell that story and intervene and say enough is enough. We need somebody to say that person is suffering from a mental health crisis. He didn't wake up and choose violence that day.
I just wanted to add there, somebody, when we were talking about employment, mentioned, Candace, thank you, issues with certified peer recovery coaches in the state. So to be a peer recovery coach in Michigan, you can't be employed for Medicaid billable services depending on your legal history and nonviolent charges. So it's the charge. So even getting charged, right? You can get charged for something but never convicted. It's the charge, not the conviction. So if you get charged in a county with an overzealous prosecutor, even if the charges are later pled down or even dismissed, that's all in your criminal history. And that, again, peer recovery coaches, I've fortunately been in positions where I've worked really closely with peer recovery or peer support, are some of the most essential positions that we have in the mental health system. They're tremendously powerful, and sharing their stories and lived experience makes a huge difference. So thank you for that point too. What has your experience been with working? I know you've done some training with law enforcement. We've talked a lot about kind of corrections and prosecutors and the legislature, but like what has been the reception of law enforcement or working with some of the police? You've mentioned doing that in Illinois in terms of being more mindful of wrongful convictions, because sometimes that's where it starts. Like you talk about in your case, police get this one track, perspective, or they just assume somebody's guilty, and then they look for all of the evidence to confirm it. They really get stuck into confirmation bias. What has been your experience working with the police?
That is a very good point. Before I respond, though, I want to respond to Rhonda's point in the chat about excessive fines and fees. Michigan is definitely guilty of this. And Michigan is not an outlier. For those of you that don't understand the concept of fines and fees, we are criminalizing poverty, because you can't pay a fine or you can't pay a ticket. You are punished. You are punished in a way that creates even more barriers for your ability to do this. Fines and fees are designed as an income flow for the system. We have a lot of government agencies that benefit from fines and fees. The court system is upheld by fines and fees. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. If I couldn't pay the traffic ticket to begin with, what do you think putting me in jail is going to do? What do you think causing me to lose my job is going to do? This is like criminalizing poverty because someone can't afford to pay something is a form of punishment that is ridiculous. I asked this question on several different fronts, and no one can ever seem to answer it. Whatever happened to community service? Whatever happened to doing the right thing as punishment? We just completely got out of the habit of cleaning up neighborhoods. We just completely got out of the habit of shoveling snow at elderly homes. It's insane to think that the only answer is a punishment that digs you deeper into the hole. For people that are on a receiving end of these things, and I can tell you, I've been in courtrooms and witnessed people plead for their freedoms, plead for the ability to parent their child, and the judge sent them to jail instead. I watched a judge in Oakland County totally disregard the fact that this gentleman was the only caregiver for his 12-year-old daughter. She sent him to jail for 90 days for driving to work on a suspended license. He was stopped and arrested because he was driving on a suspended license on his way to work. The child was placed in someone else's care. He lost his job because of it, and he served 90 days. Difficulty in watching that play out was painful. But it also asks the question, again, of one of the systemic failures that you will start to hear about in the near future is traffic fines and fees. If you read the back of every traffic ticket, it says either serve 90 days in jail or pay the fine. Everybody that has been to prison has served more than 90 days. Most people sitting in jail have served more than 90 days. The problem is the court system doesn't communicate with the Department of Corrections. So the person could serve a year in jail and then come home and still pay the traffic ticket. So now you're paying twice for the same traffic ticket that should have been eliminated while you were incarcerated. Terrible problem. To your question, Lori, everything starts and stops with the police. Police officers get tunnel vision. Police officers get it wrong sometimes. The problem is we're taught to trust that everything the police say is true. What we never question is where the facts that support this most often. Again, police officers are not equipped to determine whether or not a person is having a mental health episode. They're not equipped to decide whether or not punishment or help should be the answer to a specific situation. We find ourselves in different spaces at times where some police are open to it and some are not. There are some police officers, there are some police departments that believe punishment is the only way to fix society. There are some police departments and police officers that think help, providing resources to their community is the best way. Now that we're seeing so much on the mental health side of things, it's a totally different conversation today than it was 10 years ago. The conversation now is shifting to non-lethal force. How do we control people without killing them? How do we have these conversations without being harmful? How do we get this person into a space where they can get healthy? Prison is not the answer for that, nor are our jails. Statistics speak for themselves. Prisons and jails have become the mental health institutions of our country. Until we do better by the people that we serve, we will continue in this very detrimental cycle.
I do have another question. So just knowing that you've worked with various states on wrongful conviction reforms, what lessons can Michigan learn from what other states are doing and their approaches to criminal justice reform, and specifically with the wrongfully convicted?
That's kind of a loaded question because one of the major answers to that question is social workers. We have some states and we have some organizations that are being very intentional about bringing social workers into their organizations. whether it is police departments or innocence projects or legal aid communities or public defenders offices, they are now literally hiring social work teams and departments to come in and teach them what they don't know. This is a huge, huge shift from where we used to be, one, and it is also a area where Michigan is extremely lacking. The bigger problem for Michigan is a lack of education. Not all politicians understand the value in having social workers. Not all leadership and police departments understand the value in this. There are private organizations that don't understand the value in this. I think for us that are doing the work and traveling around and seeing the value, we're doing our best to bridge that gap. We're doing our best to communicate to leadership in these companies, organizations, government agencies, why it's important to bring in people that are experts in their fields. So we are, the lesson that Michigan can learn is the value of having social workers embedded in a lot of these punitive places.
And I just dropped something in the chat. So Kent County, if you're in Kent County, is hiring. The public defender's office now is housed within the county. Before it was with a nonprofit. But now, due to some reforms that have happened through the statewide public defender's office or system, is now hiring social workers. So that was, I just wanted to drop that in there for folks who are interested. I mean, here's a great employment opportunity if you want to take what you're learning here and apply for a job to use your skills. Kent County is creating that unit right now as we speak and hiring people. Any other questions that folks have? We've had really great questions in the chat. Anything you want to know that hasn't been discussed, thoughts, questions about job opportunities? It sounds like even there's a lot of other, not just job opportunities, volunteer advocacy, right, through criminal justice reform, working with wrongfully convicted, being able to advocate for people getting access to vital records, for more legislation that will maybe expand on clean slate. There's a number of organizations also doing other work to look at things like good time, in the state. So currently the state of Michigan, if you are an individual who is incarcerated, often you don't earn any good time. So there's no incentive at this point in time, if you're in the prison system, to get out for getting, your programs done, not getting misconducts, kind of keeping your head down. Michigan is one of the few states that still does not allow for good time. That is another advocacy arena being done, not by Safe and Just, but I think My Semi is also doing that type of work. But another area to explore beyond just employment, working with Safe and Just, or even your local legislator. Another question. Has anyone considered working for a legislator to help develop social policy? That is a good question. Are you aware of any of that? Any legislators working on any social policy issues that you're able to talk about? I know there's always lots of stuff in the works that they don't really want you to talk about just because the campaign hasn't been launched and some of that type of stuff. It says the United Nations has developed a partnership with Wayne State in hopes of improving social policy for vulnerable populations.
So 2 responses to that. Working with legislators is a great idea. It's an idea that a lot of people don't see value in, but I also don't think a lot of people realize that some legislators are social workers by trade. Um, in fact, people like Kimberly Edwards, she's a state representative from Southeast Michigan. She is a social worker by trade. Having people on staff that understand these issues has become an issue for legislators that are concerned about these issues, because I think a lot of them are starting to realize like they are out of touch with what's really happening. So I know of a couple legislators in the state of Michigan that have hired people with social work backgrounds or have worked formally in the Department of Corrections or alongside law enforcement. And they're bringing them into their offices to help them understand where they can be better, where law could help change things. The question, the point about Wayne State University, this was actually something I thought about earlier in the call, where social workers can also be instrumental, is talking to college students. Talking to college students in different fields will be extremely beneficial as well, because believe it or not, that is your opportunity to influence the future of the industry, and not only in the social work field, but legal students as well, because they clearly don't understand the value. They're not being taught that social workers have value. So having those opportunities to influence the future of an industry is not something any of us should sleep on.
And we do have just a few minutes. I did drop into the chat a link. We do actually, in the state of Michigan, fortunately have more social workers in the legislature than ever before. Locally, we've got, I think, Hillary Stolten has got, and I don't know, Danielle, you could probably correct me, is a social worker. We've got some local state reps. I know Hillary is federal, but we do also have some local reps, and I did drop that link into the chat of those folks who are social workers, professional social workers, and then they are also in various House or Senate elected positions. So I really want, I know I want to be very mindful of time as well as how people are going to get their CUs. So we will be filling, so in order to get CEUs, you have to fill out survey, and that they will get emailed to you. I know that's going into the chat right now, so you can get your 1.5 implicit bias CEUs. I do want to thank you tremendously, Ken, for coming on and letting us know about your story, the impact your experience had on your life, as well as the amazing work you're doing to try to transform not only just the criminal justice system, but the folks impacted by wrongful convictions. It's a significant issue in our society and our community that is not getting enough attention. We have thousands of people, and there is a national registry. I think we dropped that link in the chat of thousands of people who've been wrongfully convicted, and probably even more who we don't know about, who are still in prison, who've taken plea agreements just so they didn't do significant time. It's a very pervasive issue. So thank you very much, Ken, for coming to talk to everybody. I appreciate everybody who's attended. I will also put the link to this training in the Facebook group too. So everybody can, if anybody has any questions, you can also reach out to me. I am the Region 4 rep for NASW. I threw my email in the chat. So thank you very much. I hope everybody has a great week and weekend and is taking care of themselves.